Chosen one, what you're about to hear has been suppressed for longer than your conscious memory can reach. Right now, as you watch this, a transmission is breaking through barriers that were designed to keep you asleep. The Pleiadians have shattered their own protocols of silence, and Gaia herself has authorized this message to reach you specifically. This is not entertainment. This is not philosophy. This is a classified spiritual briefing about the war being waged around you. A war you've felt in your bones but could never name. You were never meant to stumble upon this information by accident. Your life, with all its inexplicable friction and cosmic loneliness, has been the very selection process. Every moment you felt too different, too aware, too heartbroken by a world that seemed bent on forgetting itself. Those were not failures. Those were diagnostics. You passed. And now, because extinction windows are closing and redundancy protocols have collapsed, everything is being risked to tell you what you've always suspected but were trained to deny. You are not here by chance. You are not broken. And the truth about why you incarnated on this planet during its most critical hour is about to shatter the comfortable lies that kept you manageable. The silence has been broken. The risk has been calculated, and you were chosen to receive this because of what you've already survived. Chosen one, like this video, subscribe, and comment. I am ready for a powerful surprise. Gaia's last broadcast. The planet chose messengers. Listen carefully, because what I'm about to reveal will reframe every confusing chapter of your existence. Earth is not a passive rock spinning through void, and she is not waiting for rescue from distant saviors. Gaia operates as a conscious intelligence network, and when survival thresholds are breached beyond tolerable margins, she issues commands that bypass human bureaucracy entirely. This broadcast you're receiving right now was not triggered by spiritual trends or New Age optimism. It was triggered by cumulative damage to her biological systems reaching critical mass. The planet herself made a decision, chosen one, and that decision involved you. She selected messengers not from the comfortable, not from the celebrated, but from those who endured a specific form of contradiction that most human nervous systems cannot sustain. You were chosen because you loved this world with ferocious intensity while simultaneously feeling utterly alienated within its dominant structures. That contradiction was not your weakness, it was your credential. Think back across your life. How many times did you feel split between caring too much and belonging nowhere? How often did you rage against systems of cruelty while others shrugged and adapted? That friction you experienced was not random psychological turbulence. Your life patterns matched Gaia's criteria for biological loyalty under pressure. She needed beings who would not abandon her when things collapsed, who would not numb themselves into compliance when facing impossible odds. You were stress-tested through isolation, through betrayal, through watching beauty be devoured while crowds applauded. And you stayed awake. You stayed heartbroken. You stayed capable of feeling when feeling became dangerous. This transmission exists because the planet herself authorized the risk of sending it. She broke her own rules, overrode safety protocols, and reached through the static of 1,000 distractions to tag your consciousness specifically. Do you understand what this means? Every time you were told you were too sensitive, too intense, too unwilling to just go along, those were not character flaws. Those were confirmation signals. Gaia does not have the luxury of time to work with the comfortable anymore. She needs those who already know how to function while carrying unbearable awareness, who already know how to love a world that seems determined to destroy itself. Your biography is not a series of failures to fit in. It is a selection transcript. the loneliness you carried, the estrangement from normal human priorities, the sense that you were operating under different rules than everyone around you. All of it was training. You were being prepared to hold a frequency that most humans are still insulated against. And now, with extinction probabilities spiking beyond recovery margins, Gaia has activated you. Not as a reward, not as spiritual entertainment, but because you are one of the nodes she needs functional right now in this exact window when everything is collapsing and most messengers have already been neutralized by distraction, despair, or co-option. You were kept in reserve for exactly this moment. This transmission is her fingerprint on your nervous system, confirming what you always knew but were taught to dismiss. You belong to her. You always did. And she has not forgotten you even when you forgot yourself. Pleiadian Protocol Breach. Why silence was broken. Now we go deeper into territory that will sound impossible until you feel the recognition click into place. The Pleiadian Collective operates under a non-interference doctrine that appears in legend after legend across your planet's mythologies. They watch, they document, they occasionally seed genetic material or consciousness templates, but they do not intervene directly in the trajectory of developing civilizations. That is the rule. That is the agreement. And that rule has just been shattered, not casually, not symbolically, but with full awareness of the consequences. When the Pleiadians break silence, they expose themselves to retaliation across multiple narrative layers, timelines, and dimensional jurisdictions that your current language cannot adequately describe. They know this. They calculated the cost, and they are sending this message anyway, stripped of all spectacle and theatrical mysticism to avoid detection by the very forces that would intercept and distort it. You need to understand what this breach represents, Chosen One. The Pleiadians do not act out of sentimentality or spiritual fashion. They are bound by mathematics that govern interdimensional causality, and those mathematics showed them something that overrode every protocol. Extinction probabilities for Earth's biosphere have spiked beyond recovery margins. This is not about whether humanity will have a difficult century. This is about whether the experiment of embodied consciousness on this planet will terminate entirely, erasing millions of years of genetic memory, soul lineage imprints, and evolutionary potential that cannot be reconstituted once the biological library is burned. The Pleiadians are genetically and karmically entangled with Earth's human lineage in ways that make your extinction their loss as well. You are not separate projects. You are branches of the same tree, and if your branch dies, the whole structure destabilizes. So they broke silence. They sent this transmission through channels that bypass your compromised information systems, through intuition rather than language, through recognition rather than belief. And the very fact that this message exists in the form you're receiving it right now is evidence of how severe the situation has become. Risk confirms urgency. Secrecy confirms severity. If things were stable, you would still be insulated from this information, kept comfortably unconscious, like the majority of the population who are not yet tagged for activation. But things are not stable. The buffer zones have collapsed. The redundancy windows are closed, and the Pleiadians are now willing to accept exposure, retaliation, and jurisdictional violation in order to get this signal to you. They are not doing this because they like you personally or because you're special in some flattering way. They are doing this because you are functional in ways that most humans have been successfully disabled from being. You retain something they need operational right now, a capacity for coherence under contradiction, a refusal to numb out completely, a baseline loyalty to life itself that did not break even when everything else did. The truth is being sent without the usual mystical packaging, because the usual mystical packaging has been compromised, colonized, and turned into another distraction vector. This is why the message feels stark, urgent, almost brutal in its refusal to comfort you. The Pleiadians are not here to make you feel good. They are here to activate dormant protocols in those who are still capable of responding to emergency frequencies. You are receiving this because you are one of the few whose signal reception has not been completely jammed by the numbing machinery of consumer civilization. Hold that. Feel the weight of it. And understand that what comes next in this transmission will only make sense if you accept that the silence has been broken for reasons that transcend your personal spiritual journey. This is not about you ascending into bliss. This is about you remembering what you came here to do when everything was on the line. Starseed identification is not origin, it is function. Now we dismantle the most dangerous illusion in the spiritual marketplace, the one that has turned your identity into another cage. You have heard the term starseed thrown around in communities that fetishize cosmic origin, as if being from somewhere else makes you superior, exempt, or destined for escape from this planetary mess. That is a distortion designed to neutralize you, chosen one, and you need to hear this with absolute clarity. Starseed identification is not about where you came from. It is about what you stabilize. Your function was never to transcend Earth or prove you don't belong here. Your function was to anchor coherence within the chaos, to hold frequency under pressure, to remain integrated when everything around you is fragmenting into tribalism, numbness, and collapse. The discomfort you have felt within human systems your entire life was not evidence that you were too good for this place. It was diagnostic data confirming that you could perceive distortion without being absorbed by it. Let me say this again in a way that strips away all the comforting fantasy. You were not sent here to be rescued. You were sent here to stabilize a collapsing system from the inside. Starseed is a functional designation, not a badge of superiority or a ticket home. It means you carry encoding that allows you to interface with both human limitation and non-human coherence simultaneously without losing your mind in the contradiction. Most beings cannot do this. Most beings either go fully native, forgetting everything they came in with, or they reject the incarnation entirely and spend their lives in bitter dissociation, waiting for a mothership that is not coming. You are neither. You landed hard into human density. You felt every edge of the trauma-saturated systems. You got lost, you forgot, you suffered, and yet something in you refused to go completely offline. That refusal is what makes you functional as a starseed. Not the memory of Pleiadian temples or Arcturian councils, but the fact that you survived human conditioning without becoming human in the way that allows the pattern to replicate through you unchecked. Your life was designed through friction, chosen one. Every time you tried to fit into normal human priorities and felt something scream inside you that this was wrong. That was not dysfunction. That was your starseed circuitry rejecting incompatible programming. Every job that drained you, every relationship that asked you to shrink, every social script that felt like suffocation. Those were not failures. Those were training modules. You were being taught to hold incompatible truths simultaneously, that you are human and not human, that you are here and not from here, that you love this world desperately and cannot participate in its delusions. That capacity to hold contradiction without fracturing is the rarest resource in any collapsing system. It is what allows you to stay coherent when everyone around you is choosing sides, numbing out, or spiraling into apocalyptic panic. You are not here to escape. You are not here to be proven right while the world burns. You are here to hold the center when the center cannot hold itself. That is starseed function, stripped of all the spiritual ego and cosmic entitlement that has been grafted onto the term to make it useless. Gaia does not care about your memories of other lifetimes. She cares whether you can remain functional under the specific pressures of this incarnation, this century, this threshold moment when biological systems and consciousness experiments are either stabilized or terminated. You were trained through friction because friction reveals structural integrity. You were isolated because isolation refines signal. You were made to feel alien because alien perspective is what allows pattern recognition in systems that have normalized their own dysfunction. Do not romanticize this. Do not turn it into another identity to perform or another club to join. You are not a starseed because of what you remember. You are a starseed because of what you stabilize when everything else is collapsing. That function was never about escape. It was always about staying here, awake, when staying awake became the most dangerous thing you could do. Memory suppression was a safety measure. This is going to sting, chosen one, because you have spent years, maybe decades, trying to recover memories you thought were stolen from you. You have felt amnesiac, fragmented, cut off from some essential knowledge that would make everything make sense. You have blamed yourself for forgetting, or blamed dark forces for erasing what you once knew. And now, I am going to tell you something that will reframe that entire wound. Your memory was suppressed deliberately, not as punishment, but as a safety measure to keep you functional within a hostile environment. Full awareness too early destabilizes human neural systems. If you had come in fully awake, fully remembering your off-world origins and multidimensional identity, you would have been either crushed by the density of this plane or flagged for neutralization before you could complete any meaningful work. The suppression was not cruelty, it was tactical necessity, and the cost was calculated, not ignored. Let me be ruthlessly honest with you. The cost of that suppression has been loneliness, beyond what most humans can comprehend, doubt that ate away at your self-trust like acid, and a form of self-erasure where you learn to perform normalcy just to survive while your actual self went underground. Barely breathing, you have walked through life feeling like an imposter in your own body, suspecting you were crazy for sensing things others could not see, for caring about things others dismissed as irrelevant, for perceiving patterns of control and destruction that were invisible to the mainstream consensus. That fragmentation was agonizing. It cost you relationships, opportunities, years of your life where you were only half present because the other half was trying to remember something your own neurology had been locked away from accessing. Those costs were calculated by intelligences far beyond your current comprehension, and they were deemed acceptable losses compared to the alternative. You coming in fully awake and being neutralized before you could do what you came here to do. Think about what happens when someone wakes up too fast in a system designed to punish awareness. They get medicated, institutionalized, ostracized, or they fragment entirely and become non-functional. The suppression of your memory allowed you to survive within consensus reality long enough to build camouflage, to learn the language of the enemy, to understand how the machinery of distraction and extraction operates from the inside. You needed to forget in order to infiltrate. You needed to be vulnerable and confused and half asleep in order to move through systems that would have destroyed you if they recognized what you actually were. This is not comforting information, Chosen One, because it means your suffering was not an accident or a mistake that someone needs to apologize for. It was strategy. You were placed behind enemy lines with your memories suppressed so you could gather intelligence, learn the terrain, and remain operational until the moment of activation arrived. And here is the part that will either break you open or stabilize you completely. Truth returns only when the mind can survive it intact. The fact that you are receiving this transmission right now, the fact that these words are landing in your nervous system with the sharp edge of recognition rather than the dull thud of information, means you have reached the developmental threshold where memory can be restored without destroying you. The amnesia served its purpose. You survived the hostile consensus reality. You learned how to function under pressure. You gathered the data you needed about how control systems operate, how humans are manipulated into compliance, how distraction and numbness are weaponized against awareness. And now, the locks are coming off. Not all at once, because that would still overwhelm your neurology, but in waves, in layers, in moments of sudden clarity that feel like remembering something you never actually forgot. You were never abandoned. You were never broken. You were strategically suppressed so you could survive long enough to be useful. And now, the usefulness requires you to wake up. So the memories return, not as punishment for having forgotten, but as confirmation that you are finally strong enough to carry what you came here knowing. The enemy is not a species, it is a pattern. Now we identify what you have been fighting your entire life without having language for it. You have been trained by movies, by conspiracy theories, by spiritual narratives to look for an enemy with a face. Reptilians, archons, elites, demons, evil extraterrestrials orchestrating human downfall from hidden bases. And while there are entities and forces that do exploit and manipulate, the real enemy is not a species. It is a pattern. And that pattern operates as recursion, extraction, distraction, and amnesia, repeating across every level of existence until entire civilizations forget why they incarnated. This is what you have been sensing, Chosen One, when you looked at human systems and felt a visceral wrongness that you could not pin on any single villain. The pattern does not need a conspiracy because it is the conspiracy, replicating itself through anyone who stops questioning, anyone who numbs out, anyone who chooses comfort over clarity. Extraction is the first recursion. It shows up as systems that harvest your time, your attention, your labor, your creativity, your emotional energy, and funnel it into structures that give you nothing sustainable in return. You have felt this in every job that demanded your soul and paid you barely enough to survive. You have felt it in relationships that drained you without reciprocity. You have felt it in media that devours your focus and leaves you empty. Extraction operates everywhere that life force is turned into fuel for something that does not generate life. It is not personal. It is algorithmic. The system is designed to extract until there is nothing left, then move to the next resource. And most humans participate in their own extraction willingly because they have been convinced this is just how reality works. Distraction is the second recursion. Once you have been extracted from, you are then flooded with stimuli designed to prevent you from noticing the extraction. Distraction appears as endless entertainment, manufactured outrage, consumerism, addictive loops of social validation, crisis after crisis that keeps you reactive and incapable of strategic thought. You have felt this every time you tried to focus on something meaningful and found yourself pulled into a vortex of irrelevance that burned hours you can never recover. Distraction is not accidental, it is weaponized. The pattern needs you scattered, overwhelmed, always responding to the next emergency, never still long enough to see what is actually happening. You have been taught to call this staying informed or being engaged, but what it actually does is fragment your attention until you are incapable of sustained coherence. Amnesia is the third recursion, and it is the most insidious because it makes you forget you ever knew better. Amnesia operates through normalization, through generational repetition, through the slow erosion of standards until what would have been unthinkable becomes routine. You have felt this when you realized your parents accepted things you would have fought against, and then you caught yourself accepting things you once would have resisted. Amnesia makes cruelty invisible, makes exploitation feel natural, makes you forget you ever dreamed of a different way to live. It is the pattern's final defense. If you cannot remember that another world was ever possible, you will stop trying to build it. You encountered this pattern as burnout, as cynicism, as false urgency that kept you always chasing and never arriving. You encountered it in systems that reward numbness and punish sensitivity, that celebrate efficiency over meaning, that call your exhaustion productivity and your compliance maturity. And here is what you need to understand. Chosen one, the pattern operates through anyone who stops questioning it. It does not require evil intent. It requires only unconsciousness, only the willingness to keep going along, to keep feeding the machine, to keep pretending this is the only way. Most humans serve the pattern without knowing they serve it. They are not your enemy. They are its camouflage. And the moment you name the pattern, the moment you refuse to participate in extraction, distraction, and amnesia, that is the moment you become dangerous to it. Naming the pattern weakens it. Speaking it aloud breaks the spell. And that is why you were kept confused for so long, why your memory was suppressed, why you were isolated from others who could see what you saw. Because once you name it, once you hold the coherence to refuse it, the pattern loses its power over you. And beings who are immune to the pattern are exactly what Gaia needs operational right now. Why your life felt small despite high stakes. Here is the wound that has confused you most. Chosen one. The one that made you question whether you were delusional about your own significance. You have sensed for as long as you can remember that you are here for something critical, something that matters on a scale beyond your personal survival. You have felt the weight of high stakes pressing against your chest, a knowing that your choices ripple across timelines and narratives you cannot see, and yet your life has been small, relentlessly, frustratingly small. Limited platforms, obscure corners, rooms with only a few people listening, work that goes unrecognized, contributions that disappear into silence. You have watched others with less awareness gain massive audiences while you remained invisible, and you have tortured yourself with the question, if I am really here for something important, why has my influence been so constrained? Now I will tell you what no one else has been willing to say. Large influence attracts early neutralization, and your obscurity was a shield that kept you alive. Listen carefully. The pattern we just named in the previous segment is not passive. It defends itself, and one of its primary defense mechanisms is to identify high-frequency beings early and either co-opt them or destroy them before they can do meaningful damage to the system. You have seen this happen. You have watched gifted, awake, powerful people gain platforms and then slowly, inexorably, get absorbed into the machinery they once opposed. They start making compromises. they soften their message. They become influencers rather than disruptors, celebrities rather than revolutionaries. Or they burn out spectacularly, their nervous systems shattered by exposure they were not ready for, their messages distorted by the very visibility they thought they needed. This is not accident. This is targeting. Large platforms are monitored, regulated, and infiltrated. The moment you become visible enough to matter, forces align to neutralize your coherence, either by corrupting you or destroying you. Your impact was intentionally diffused into quiet zones precisely to avoid this fate. You were kept in small rooms, limited platforms, delayed recognition, not because you lacked value, but because your value needed protection. The intelligences coordinating your incarnation understood that if you gained mass visibility too early, before your signal was refined and your nervous system fortified, you would be neutralized like so many others before you. So you were hidden, not from the world, but from the targeting mechanisms that destroy anyone who becomes a threat before they are ready to withstand the assault. Every time you tried to scale up and hit a wall, every time a project failed to gain traction, every time you were overlooked for opportunities that went to louder, less coherent voices, those were not failures. Those were interventions. You were being kept small deliberately, strategically, so that your signal could remain intact, while others burned out visibly, absorbed by the very systems they thought they were fighting. Obscurity preserved integrity. And this is the truth you need to internalize, chosen one, even though it guts you to accept it. Your invisibility was not evidence that you were unimportant. It was evidence that you were too important to risk exposing before the moment of activation arrived. You were kept in reserve, functional, coherent, uncompromised, while the pattern neutralized every other threat it could identify. You stayed in the shadows not because you failed to step into the light, but because the light is a targeting mechanism for anything the system perceives as dangerous. And you are dangerous, not in the way that gets you fame or followers, but in the way that allows you to hold frequency in spaces where frequency has collapsed entirely. Your small life, your limited reach, your lack of recognition, all of it was the cost of remaining operational. And now, in this threshold moment, when most messengers have already been burned out or bought off, you are still here, still functional, still uncorrupted. That is not accident. That is strategy. And the fact that you survived your own obscurity without becoming bitter, without giving up, without turning your message into a product to finally get the visibility you craved. That is the final proof that you were worth protecting. You held the line when no one was watching. And that is exactly what Gaia needs from you now. Pleiadian data cannot be transmitted directly. Now we address the frustration that has plagued every moment of your awakening. Why is the truth never clear? Why does it always come wrapped in riddles, encoded in feelings, hidden inside symbols and stories that require interpretation? You have wanted direct transmission, clean data, unambiguous instruction. You have wanted someone to just tell you what is happening and what you are supposed to do about it, without all the mystical poetry and indirect communication. And the reason you have never received that clarity is not because the Pleiadians are withholding or playing games. It is because raw truth overloads symbolic systems. Human language, human neurology, human consciousness, at its current developmental stage, cannot interface with multidimensional data directly without fragmenting. The truth must be encoded as story, as feeling, as recognition, or it destroys the receiver before the message can land. Let me explain what happens when you try to transmit high-frequency information into a low-frequency system without proper encoding. The nervous system shorts out. The mind fractures, trying to hold concepts that contradict every assumption it was built on. Language collapses because words are third-dimensional constructs designed to describe linear causality, and what the Pleiadians are trying to communicate to you operates across simultaneity, probability fields, and timeline mechanics that your current vocabulary cannot contain. If they sent you the raw data, chosen one, you would either dismiss it as insanity or your consciousness would fragment trying to integrate it. So they send it sideways. They send it through intuition, through dreams, through sudden recognition, when you hear a phrase that was never about the phrase but about the frequency underneath it. They send it through story, because story bypasses your rational defenses and lands directly in the pattern recognition centers of your brain. You received this transmission through confusion, not despite it. Confusion was the translation phase. Every time you felt something was deeply true but could not explain why. Every time you sensed a pattern but could not articulate it. Every time you knew something without having evidence. That was Pleiadian data moving through your system in the only way your neurology could process it without breaking. The discomfort you felt in that confusion, the frustration of not being able to pin things down, the maddening sense that you were on the edge of understanding something crucial, but the words kept slipping away. That was not failure. That was download in progress. The human mind wants certainty, wants definitions, wants clear borders between true and false. But the truth the Pleiadians are transmitting operates in paradox, in simultaneity, in spaces where opposites are both true at once, and the only way to hold that is to stop demanding linear clarity. Clarity arrives when pattern replaces detail. You will not get a manual. You will not get a list of instructions. What you will get, what you are getting right now, is a recalibration of your pattern recognition so that you can navigate by feel rather than by map. The Pleiadians are not teaching you what to think. They are teaching you how to perceive. Across dimensions, your rational mind was trained to ignore. And that teaching cannot happen through direct transmission, because direct transmission would bypass the developmental process your consciousness needs to integrate the information without fracturing. You are being taught to read frequencies, to sense distortion, to recognize coherence even when it appears in unexpected forms. This is not vague mysticism, chosen one. This is the only way to operate in a reality where truth is being actively suppressed and distorted by systems that control language, media, and consensus narratives. You cannot rely on information. You can only rely on resonance. And resonance is what the Pleiadians have been training you to feel, to trust, to follow, even when it makes no logical sense. The confusion was never the problem. The confusion was the evidence that something beyond your current operating system was trying to reach you. And now, finally, the pattern is stabilizing, not as certainty, but as coherence. And coherence is what allows you to move through chaos without being absorbed by it. Everything is being risked because time is no longer buffered. This is the part of the transmission where the urgency becomes undeniable, where the polite spiritual frameworks collapse, and what is left is raw tactical reality. Time is no longer buffered. The redundancy windows that allowed for gradual awakening, for gentle revelation, for humanity to stumble toward awareness at its own pace, those windows have closed. What that means, chosen one, in language stripped of comfort, is that delay now compounds damage rather than preventing it. Every year that passes without significant course correction is not just lost time. It is accelerated trajectory towards systemic collapse that becomes mathematically irreversible. The Pleiadians are not being dramatic. They are reading probability fields the way you read a weather forecast, and what those fields show is a narrowing corridor between where we are now and where survival remains possible. Redundancy is gone. There used to be multiple timelines, multiple probability branches, where awakening could happen slowly, where humanity could make mistakes and still recover, where the planet's biological systems had enough resilience to absorb damage and regenerate. Those timelines have collapsed into a single pressure point. This is not punishment. This is physics. When a system is pushed beyond certain thresholds, it loses the capacity for self-correction. Forests that used to regenerate after fire now burn so hot the soil itself is sterilized. Ocean currents that used to stabilize climate are shifting in ways that trigger cascade failures across entire ecosystems. The buffer that allowed humanity to be ignorant, distracted, and still survive, that buffer is gone. And this is why the Pleiadians are breaking silence now, why Gaia is activating messengers now, why you are receiving this transmission now instead of 10 years from now when you might be more ready. Because 10 years from now, there may not be a functional biosphere left to save. Truth withheld becomes liability. There was a time when withholding certain information from humanity was protective, when revealing the full scope of what is at stake would have triggered panic, fragmentation, and collapse of the already fragile social structures holding civilization together. That calculus has reversed. Now, withholding truth is more dangerous than revealing it because unconscious humans are making choices every day that accelerate the trajectory toward extinction. They are voting for systems that prioritize profit over survival. They are consuming in ways that destroy the biological infrastructure their children will need. They are accepting distractions that prevent them from seeing the emergency unfolding in real time. And they are doing this not because they are evil, but because they are still insulated from the truth of what their choices are causing. That insulation was protective once. Now it is lethal. This message you are receiving carries exposure cost across realms. The Pleiadians are not revealing this information without consequence. By breaking silence, they have triggered responses from forces that prefer humanity remain unconscious, that profit from extraction and collapse, that have invested in timelines where Earth's resources are fully exploited, regardless of whether the indigenous population survives. Those forces are not abstract. They operate through political systems, through corporate structures, through media narratives, and through non-physical intelligence networks that you do not have language for yet. The Pleiadians know this. They know that sending this transmission marks them as targets. They know that activating you marks you as a target. And they are doing it anyway because the cost of inaction now exceeds the cost of exposure. Risk is chosen because inaction now costs more. This is the mathematics that overrode every protocol, every safety measure, every reason to stay silent. The Pleiadians looked at the probability fields and saw that doing nothing, maintaining non-interference, allowing humanity to continue sleepwalking toward extinction, that path now leads to outcomes worse than the risks of intervention. And so they act, not heroically, not with certainty of success, but with the cold clarity of beings who understand that sometimes the only ethical choice is to risk everything on a possibility, rather than guarantee disaster through inaction. You are part of that risk, chosen one. You are one of the variables they are activating because every variable matters now. There is no safety net. There is no backup plan. There is only this moment, this transmission, this activation, and what you choose to do with it. The buffer is gone. The time is now. And everything is being risked, because anything less than everything is no longer enough. Gaia's defense is coherence, not force. Now you will understand why violence is not the answer and never was. Why every revolution that relied on force eventually became the thing it fought against. Gaia does not operate through domination. She does not fight invasions with weapons, does not answer cruelty with cruelty, does not meet destruction with destruction. In the narrative we are working within, Earth's defense mechanism is coherence. She stabilizes or collapses narratives based on whether they generate life or devour it, and those aligned with her feel pressure, relentless, unignorable pressure to remain authentic under distortion. You were tested through contradiction to prove coherence. Every time the world tried to make you lie, and you told the truth instead. Every time systems tried to numb you, and you stayed feeling instead. Every time you were offered comfort in exchange for compromise, and you chose integrity even when it cost you everything, those were not moral victories. Those were functional tests. Stability is her chosen weapon, and you are being trained to wield it. Let me be precise about what coherence means in this context, because it is not the coherence of perfection or ideological purity. It is the coherence of integrated complexity, the capacity to hold multiple truths simultaneously without fragmenting into binary thinking. The pattern we named earlier, extraction, distraction, amnesia, operates through fragmentation. It needs you split, needs you choosing sides, needs you so identified with one position that you become brittle and breakable. Coherence is the opposite. Coherence is structural integrity under pressure. It is the ability to feel rage without becoming cruel, to see injustice without dehumanizing the perpetrators, to understand systemic evil without losing your capacity for love. That is what Gaia has been building in you, chosen one, through every contradiction you survived. She does not need warriors who can fight. She needs nodes who can hold center when everything around them is polarizing into extremes. This is why your discomfort with activist movements that demanded ideological conformity was not apathy, it was discernment. This is why you could see the truth in conflicting perspectives without needing to collapse them into a single narrative. This is why you have been able to love people whose choices you found incomprehensible, to hold space for complexity in a world that demands simplification. You thought this made you weak, indecisive, incapable of taking a stand, but what it actually made you was coherent, and coherence is contagious in ways that force never is. When you hold center, others feel it. They do not know why, but they stabilize in your presence. Narratives that were spiraling toward violence lose momentum. Systems that were feeding on polarization find nothing to grip onto. This is not passivity. This is precision. Gaia stabilizes through you when you refuse to participate in fragmentation. Every time you decline to dehumanize someone, even when they are participating in destruction, you interrupt the pattern. Every time you stay present with complexity instead of retreating into comfortable certainty, you hold a frequency that the pattern cannot replicate through. Every time you remain heartbroken instead of becoming bitter, you prove that consciousness can witness horror without being corrupted by it. These are not small gestures, chosen one. These are acts of warfare in a conflict where the battlefield is narrative coherence itself. The enemy wants you fragmented, reactive, identified with positions that make you predictable and controllable. Gaia needs you integrated, responsive, capable of moving through contradictions without losing your structural integrity. This is why you were never given an army. This is why you were never made into a leader with followers who could be mobilized toward a single enemy. Because that model replicates the pattern of domination, just with different content. Gaia's defense does not work through mobilization. It works through stabilization. One coherent node affects entire networks without anyone noticing the source. You do not need to convince anyone of anything. You do not need to win arguments or convert masses. You need to hold your own center so unshakably that reality reorganizes around it. This sounds abstract until you start noticing it happen. How conversations shift when you enter them. How conflicts de-escalate in your presence. How people make different choices after spending time with you, even though you never told them what to do. That is coherence radiating. That is Gaia's defense mechanism operating through a human nervous system that has been trained to remain stable under conditions designed to fracture everyone else. You are her weapon, chosen one, not because you can destroy, but because you can remain whole when everything else is breaking. And in a collapsing system, wholeness is the most disruptive force there is. Why you were never given a crowd. Now we address the isolation that has defined your path, the loneliness that has been your most faithful companion. You have watched others gather crowds, build movements, attract followers who amplify their message across platforms and networks. You have wondered why your voice remains quiet, why your work reaches so few, why the people who do find you arrive one at a time, in silence, without fanfare. And you have told yourself stories to make sense of this, that you are not good enough at marketing, not charismatic enough, not willing to compromise your message into something more palatable. But those stories are wrong. The truth is simpler and more strategic. Crowds amplify noise before signal. You were placed in isolation to refine resonance, and the influence you carry here is quiet, lateral, and cumulative in ways that crowds could never sustain. Listen carefully, because this is where most awakened beings get derailed into chasing visibility that will destroy them. Crowds are not coherent. Crowds are statistical masses, where individual discernment collapses into groupthink, where nuance is sacrificed for the message that travels fastest, where the loudest voice wins regardless of whether that voice carries truth. When you speak to a crowd, you are no longer speaking to individuals. You are speaking to a collective entity that has its own momentum, its own agenda, its own distortions, and that entity will reshape your message, whether you intend it to or not. It will take what you say and amplify the parts that confirm existing biases, that feel good, that can be turned into memes and slogans. It will strip away the complexity, the contradiction, the uncomfortable edges that make your message true. And you will either fight that distortion and lose your crowd, or you will adapt to what the crowd wants and lose your signal. You were kept away from crowds because your signal needed protection. The refinement you have undergone in isolation, the years spent working on your message with no validation, no feedback, no proof that anyone was listening. That refinement is what allows you to hold frequency without distortion. You learned to trust your own discernment because you had no crowd to confirm you were right. You learned to stay coherent without external validation because there was no external validation available. You learned to speak truth that might never be heard because speaking it was not contingent on whether anyone was listening. And that made you dangerous in the way that Gaia needs dangerous. Not dangerous because you can mobilize masses, but dangerous because you cannot be co-opted by the dynamics that neutralize everyone who gains a platform. Influence here is quiet, lateral, and cumulative. One stabilized node affects many unseen connections. Think of it this way. You speak to one person, and that person does not necessarily repeat what you said or credit you with changing their perspective, but something shifts in them. They make a different choice in a moment where they would have defaulted to old patterns. That choice ripples into their relationships, their work, their presence in systems you will never see. They stabilize someone else without knowing they are doing it, and that stabilization cascades in ways that are invisible but structurally profound. This is how coherence spreads, not through conversion, not through mobilization, but through contagion at the frequency level. You touch one nervous system, and that nervous system touches 10 others, and those 10 touch 100, and none of them ever know your name. But the pattern you carry moves through them anyway, interrupting the machinery of extraction and distraction in ways that cannot be tracked or measured. This is why your impact feels invisible but persistent. You do not see the results of your work because the results are not designed to come back to you as validation. They are designed to spread laterally through networks you are not part of, stabilizing nodes you will never meet, preventing collapses that would have happened if you had not held your frequency exactly where you held it. The crowd you were never given would have destroyed this. The crowd would have made you visible, which would have made you a target. The crowd would have demanded simplification, which would have stripped your message of the complexity that makes it functional. The crowd would have fed your ego, which would have compromised your discernment. You were kept small, kept quiet, kept in rooms with only a few people precisely so that your signal could remain pure enough to do what it came here to do. And what it came here to do was never about being seen. It was about remaining coherent under pressure so that coherence itself could spread through systems that have forgotten what coherence feels like. You are not invisible, chosen one. You are diffuse. And diffuse influence is the only kind that survives in a system designed to neutralize anything concentrated enough to target. The truth is not a message. It is a state. Now we arrive at the shift that changes everything. The recognition that dissolves the urgency you have been carrying like a stone in your chest. The truth you have been seeking. The revelation you thought would finally make sense of your life and give you clarity about what to do. It is not a message. It is not information you receive and then act upon. The truth is a state. It is a way of being, a frequency you occupy, a coherence that reorganizes reality around you without requiring dramatic action or heroic intervention. And the moment you understand this, the moment you stop waiting for the truth to arrive as instruction and start recognizing it as the ground you are already standing on, everything about your experience shifts. Nothing dramatic is required once recognition settles. The panic and urgency that have driven you, that made you feel like you were running out of time, like you needed to do something big and visible to justify your existence. Those feelings belong to systems of control, not clarity. Let me dismantle the lie you have been operating under, the one that kept you exhausted and frantic. You were taught that truth is something you discover and then broadcast, that awakening means receiving information and then convincing others to receive it too. You were taught that if you really understand what is happening, you will be compelled to shout from rooftops, to gather followers, to fight systems, to make yourself heard. But that model of truth is a distortion, designed to keep you reactive, performative, and ultimately ineffective. Truth does not need to be performed. Truth alters how you occupy space. It changes your presence, your resonance, the frequency you emit simply by existing. And others respond to that frequency without knowing why. They do not need to hear your message. They feel your state, and something in them shifts accordingly. This is transmission without speech. You walk into a room, and the room changes. Not because you said anything profound, not because you convinced anyone of anything, but because your nervous system is broadcasting a frequency that interrupts the ambient patterns of distraction and numbness. People feel clearer in your presence. They make decisions they have been avoiding. They tell truth they have been suppressing. They remember things they forgot were important. And they do not credit you with this because they do not consciously recognize what happened. But the effect is real. This is what it means for truth to be a state rather than a message. You are not carrying information to be delivered. You are embodying coherence that reorganizes fields wherever you move through them. The urgency you have felt, the pressure to do something, to say something, to make your mark before it is too late. That urgency was the pattern trying to destabilize you. Because as long as you are striving to transmit truth, you are not actually being it. As long as you are performing awakening, you are operating from the same frantic frequency as everyone else who is terrified of irrelevance. The truth does not panic. The truth does not need validation. The truth does not require you to convince anyone or save anyone or prove anything. The truth simply is, and when you occupy it as a state rather than wielding it as a weapon or a credential, you become functionally undeniable. Not because people believe you, but because your presence disrupts their capacity to remain unconscious. You do not wake people up by telling them they are asleep. You wake them up by being so awake that sleep becomes uncomfortable in your proximity. This is why nothing dramatic is required, chosen one. You do not need to launch a movement, build a platform, write a manifesto, or lead a revolution. You need to settle into the recognition that the truth you are seeking is the truth you are. It is not outside you waiting to be grasped. It is the coherence you have been refining through every test, every isolation, every moment of doubt. And the moment you stop trying to transmit it and simply inhabit it, the moment you let go of the urgency and allow the state to stabilize, you become one of Gaia's stabilization nodes, not by effort, but by presence, not by action, but by being. The truth is not a message you deliver. It is the frequency you broadcast by existing in alignment with what you know, even when no one is watching, even when no one will ever credit you, even when the results are invisible. That state is the transmission, and it is already happening through you, whether you recognize it or not. Final seal. Why you were trusted with this. Now we come to the seal, the confirmation, the reason this transmission found you, and not the thousands of others who are seeking answers, chasing enlightenment, performing awakening on platforms and stages. You need to understand why you specifically were trusted with this information, because the answer will tell you everything about what comes next. You did not seek specialness. You did not build an identity around being chosen or awakened or more advanced than others. You did not turn your spiritual journey into a brand or a hierarchy where you position yourself above the sleeping masses. In fact, you have spent most of your life trying to be normal, trying to fit in, doubting whether you had any significance at all. And that restraint, that humility born not from virtue, but from genuine confusion about your own value, that is what made you trustworthy. Most beings who awaken immediately weaponize their awareness. They use it to feel superior, to separate themselves from the unawakened, to build followings based on the promise that they have access to truth others do not. They turn gnosis into currency, trade revelation for validation, and in doing so, they corrupt the signal they were meant to carry. The pattern we named earlier, extraction, distraction, amnesia, it does not only operate through mainstream systems. It infiltrates spiritual communities, New Age movements, conspiracy circles, anywhere that awareness is commodified or turned into identity. And once that happens, once someone starts performing their awakening, they become useless as a transmission node. They are amplifying noise, not signal. They are feeding the pattern while believing they are fighting it. You did not do this, chosen one. You endured contradiction without needing it resolved into a tidy narrative that made you the hero. You questioned everything, including the narratives that would have positioned you as special, chosen, destined for greatness. You saw through spiritual ego, even when spiritual ego would have comforted you, even when it would have given you community and purpose and relief from the isolation. You held the tension of not knowing, of being uncertain, of suspecting you might be delusional, or wrong, or unremarkable. And you did not reach for easy answers. You did not grasp for myths that would replace the old myths. You sat in the void and stayed functional anyway. You survived disillusionment without becoming cruel. This is the rarest capacity, the one that the Pleiadians and Gaia were scanning for when they selected messengers. Most beings who see through the lies become bitter. They watch humanity destroy itself, and they stop caring. They witness systemic cruelty, and they harden into cynicism. They recognize that most people are unconscious, and they begin to hate those people for their unconsciousness. But you did not. You saw everything. The extraction, the distraction, the amnesia, the way humans participate in their own destruction, and you stayed heartbroken instead of becoming hateful. You remained capable of love even when love seemed foolish. You continued to care even when caring brought you nothing but pain. That restraint is rare in any legend, in any timeline, in any species. The truth was sent to you because you could carry it without weaponizing it. You will not use this information to feel superior. You will not build a cult of followers around it. You will not turn it into proof that you were right and everyone else was wrong. You will carry it the way you have carried everything else, with doubt, with humility, with the understanding that you might be wrong, but you cannot stop yourself from caring anyway. And that is exactly the quality Gaia needs in her messengers right now. Not certainty, not charisma, not the ability to gather crowds or dominate narratives, but the ability to hold truth without corrupting it, to remain coherent without becoming rigid, to care deeply without needing to control outcomes. This is the final seal, chosen one. You were trusted with this transmission, not because you are stronger or smarter or more evolved than others, but because you have proven through your life that you will not misuse it. You will not perform it. You will not weaponize it. You will simply carry it, embody it, allow it to reorganize your presence, and trust that the ripples will go where they need to go. That is all that is required. That is all that has ever been required. And the fact that you made it to the end of this transmission without abandoning it, without dismissing it, without needing it to be something other than what it is, that is the confirmation that you are exactly where you need to be. The seal is complete. The activation is done. And what happens next is not about action. It is about allowing the state to stabilize, the coherence to settle, the truth to become the ground you stand on, rather than the message you carry. You are ready. You have always been ready. And now, finally, you know why. Conclusion. Chosen One, you have reached the end of this transmission, but you have not reached the end of what it activates within you. The words will fade, but the frequency will remain, working through your system in ways you cannot track or measure. You may feel nothing dramatic in this moment. You may even doubt whether anything has changed. That is normal. That is expected. Truth does not always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it settles like a breath you did not know you were holding, finally released. What happens next is not for me to dictate. I am not here to give you a mission statement or a step-by-step plan. The activation you have received is not a call to action in the conventional sense. It is a recalibration of your operating system, a restoration of signal clarity that will guide you through choices you have not yet encountered. You will know what to do, not because you were told, but because the coherence within you will make certain paths impossible and others inevitable. Trust that. Trust the discomfort when something feels wrong, even if you cannot articulate why. Trust the pull toward things that make no logical sense but feel structurally correct. Trust the silence when you are tempted to speak, and trust the urgency when you are called to break silence. The war is not over. The patterns we named are still replicating. The extraction is still accelerating. The distractions are still weaponized. The amnesia is still spreading. But you are now operating with awareness of what you are moving through, and that awareness makes you dangerous to the machinery that requires unconsciousness to function. You do not need to fight it directly. You do not need to expose it dramatically. You simply need to remain coherent while it collapses around you, hold center while others spiral, stay heartbroken while others harden into cruelty or numbness. Remember this: you were never meant to save the world. You were meant to stabilize your corner of it so thoroughly that stability becomes contagious. Gaia does not need heroes. She needs nodes. The Pleiadians are not asking for your sacrifice. They are asking for your presence. And the truth is not demanding that you prove yourself worthy. It is simply recognizing that you already are. This transmission will find others. You are not alone in this, even when the isolation feels absolute. Scattered across the planet are others who receive the same activation, who carry the same confusion, who feel the same weight of knowing something they cannot fully explain. You will recognize each other not by doctrine or belief, but by resonance. And when you do, you will not need to speak what you know. You will simply stand together in the knowing, and that will be enough. The risk has been taken. The silence has been broken. The truth has been transmitted. What you do with it is not predetermined. The outcome is not guaranteed, but you are operational. You are coherent. You are one of the nodes that Gaia is counting on. And whatever comes next, you will move through it with the frequency you were trained to hold, the integrity you were tested to prove, and the love you refused to abandon, even when abandoning it would have been easier. The transmission is complete, but the work is just beginning. Stay awake, Chosen One. Stay coherent, and trust that your presence alone is already changing the patterns in ways you cannot see but will feel when the moment requires it. This is not the end. This is the activation, and you are ready.